Okay, so we start our discussion around which the Ukrainian media sector has been discussing for the past few years. There are new journalist associations which call themselves self-regulating. There are new legislative initiatives which aim to regulate Ukrainian media market. And today, I'm awaiting a hot discussion on the question, what is happening with the Ukrainian self-regulation in the media sphere? What prevents us from further developing? Maybe we already have the self-regulation, maybe we don't have it. Before we proceed to the discussion, I would like to invite Liana Khorovytska, who is National Project Officer at OSCE Project Coordinator in Ukraine, because OSCE, for the first time, they conducted a research in Ukraine. They carried out an opinion poll among several thousands of journalists. They asked the question about self-regulation. The results of this research, personally for me, were quite strange. What are the challenges? One of the challenges were oligarchs. 76 people said that key challenges are oligarchs. Secondly, journalists said that one of the challenges is education. Maybe there is a lack of education, but I don't know what relation it has to self-regulation. And a lot of people said that the problem is self-regulation is about the ethics, about journalist standards, about responsibility of the media, not about the protection. If we are talking about measures to improve self-regulation, key answers are spreading of information, 63%, 41% said that we need to discuss more, 41% of respondents said that we need to care more about the self-regulation organization. I agree that there is no enough information, but all the three questions are related to information. Maybe they mean that we lack understanding in the media community on what is regulation, what is self-regulation, who are self-regulating organization. And let me give word to Oleksiy Pogorelov, president of the Ukrainian Media Business Association and member of the Commission on Journalism Ethics. Oleksiy, so what is actually self-regulation? What is the difference between self-regulation and state regulation? And what are the challenges to development of self-regulation? First, I would like to comment on the research, although I would like to hear first from those people who actually carried out this research, because unfortunately there is no information in the research on who made this research, this presentation. So I think it wouldn't be proper for me to comment on this because we don't know who were the respondents. I see that 51% say that they don't have enough time. We don't have time to understand what is self-regulation. What is self-regulation? These are the rules set by the state. What is self-regulation or co-regulation? This is when the industry sets its own rules and commitments, and these commitments are transferred to the state, and the state might have an impact. Self-regulation is when a media industry or an industry or community sets the rules for themselves and solves all the issues by themselves. So it means that the journalists just get together, or managers, or producers, or owners.
Well, if managers, then it's probably a different thing. Maybe it's about, the ad market more. No, why? When the chief editors of regional outlets gathered and created rules on how local outlets are going to work during the local elections, so they have come to an agreement between themselves. We will do this, we won't do that, and we won't do that. And we will not intervene. So, and the state, you are on your own, and this is our area, this is our sphere. We have accepted certain rules, and we will work according to these rules. So, self regulation can be possible on several levels, right? How the journalists can gather together and come to a certain agreement, even of one editorial office, right? Yes, it's self regulation is the tool that has no limitations, neither geographical or industrial, then what precludes us from doing it? Who us? Let's define us as a community. Do you have a good self-regulations? How do you evaluate it? Well, I think that self-regulation, judging by its basic principles, can be effective when there are people who would like to agree to a certain list of rules because they want to comply with these rules. But if it's done externally, that is not self-regulation, that is regulation. But there must be a motivation, right? So, according to the survey's answers, motivation lacks because the information lacks. But there's the will in the state. Well, the state always is willing to regulate, to collect taxes. That's the function of the state. But in this situation, it's not about taxes, it's about other preferences. The state cannot exist without taxes. But I'm speaking about information categories, right? It's about regulating media market when we see that there are new legislative initiatives coming up. How do you evaluate the situation, the balance between self-regulation and regulation in our market? So you want the factual information or on the basis of the law on the media? Well, in fact, the balance is hard to be assessed because there must be some basis for evaluation. I can say nothing about balance because it's hard to assess. So what are the roles that gives this balance? So please then sum up and name 3 main problems of self-regulation development. Thank you very much. A very good question. I think the following: in order to be developing in harmony, and in this draft law that I quoted about media, there must be clearly separated areas of influence or areas of responsibilities. Like, for example, one is a zone of regulating by the state, another zone where it's the co-regulation, and this sphere, like industry, please be self-regulate, and if you don't, then we'll have to intervene. But to a certain extent, we are ready to delegate this for self-regulation. That's number one. Now, secondly, it's very important to support this. You're saying that there is no demand. I agree. There is no demand for self-regulation because these are rules, but it's easier to work without rules. Business always sets limitations or restrictions when it needs these restrictions. But if the restrictions are not vitally important, then the business is not going to set them because business, according to its nature, is to be free. And it's about possibilities. It's a search of niche where you can make money, and business is always going to aspire for freedom because this freedom is to be covered. Of course, there might be some restrictions by the state, but it's important within this context to encourage a certain self-regulation activity because self-regulation is important in the aspects where the state wouldn't have to intervene, especially when it's about freedom of speech, about journalistic activity, so about things where all over the world, which are all over the world, are self-regulated and where self-regulations works efficiently. And from the point of view of encouraging, when the state gets in the area of grants, of support, it's important to use here questions of ethical standards or of business quality, because the state wouldn't have to support the non-ethical media. So those media which follow the ethical standards should receive something. So the advantages of self-regulation will be discussed later, but now, while we are here discussing what self-regulation is, and I think that our market doesn't really understand it yet because it's free, and it's not scared yet, or maybe too much scared. But there are other trends developing in the world which are echoing here, and one of those trends is the implementation of the individual ombudsman, press ombudsman, in separate media, which would follow the compliance of ethical and professional standards.
Виконавча
Have oh, we will give floor uh, and now we will give floor to Alan Sunderland, Executive Director of NGO News Ombudsman and Standards Editors. So, do we have the connection with Mr. Sunderland?
Yes, we do.
So, I would like to ask you, Mr. Sunderland, to tell us about these press ombudsmen. How do they function? What is their function? Who is financing them? And can these press ombudsmen appear in Ukraine, and what do we need them for?
Thank you very much. Look, I'm delighted to be invited to speak to this conference today. I'll keep my remarks short, but I'll be very interested to listen to the conversation and to answer any questions you may have. Let me start with an apology. I last visited the Ukraine in 1991 as part of a journalist's delegation. And as you might imagine, I think things are rather different since then. So I'm the first to admit that my knowledge of the situation on the ground in the Ukraine when it comes to the state of the media today is very limited. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I guess I'm here to talk about what I see as the fundamental importance and value of self-regulation. I think that the reality around the world, I represent an organisation with 50 different media members in Europe, in Asia, in North and South America, and around the world, in Oceania as well, and Australia, where I'm from. We all experience a very different level of government interference, government control, commercial pressures, interest groups, powerful individuals who seek to influence the media. That's the reality to a greater or lesser degree for all media organisations around the world. But fundamentally, those of us who are committed to the principles of journalism understand that to the greatest extent possible, and only you will know what is possible in your market, in your organisation, in your country, but to the greatest extent possible, our primary relationship, our primary responsibility is to the public we serve. And so those of us who have a commitment to journalism, to accurate and informative information about the world that helps us to be good citizens in the world, those of us who are committed to that, understand that we need to earn the trust of our audience. That is one of our primary relationships that will give an indication of whether we prosper or whether we decline as a news organisation. So I was interested to hear people talking before about the realities of commercial business and how hard it is to make money, how hard it is to survive, and businesses like to be free. Of course they do. Why should they voluntarily regulate if they don't have to? My view on that is simple. If you are making cars, you have a quality control operation in place. If you don't, you make terrible cars, and sooner or later, if people have a choice, they don't buy them. There's no difference when it comes to journalism. If you want your journalism to prosper and survive long term, it needs to be trusted. And if you want it to be trusted, you need to demonstrate that, first of all, you have a set of principles and standards that you believe in when it comes to your journalism. And secondly, that you are going to hold yourself to account to meet those standards. So you live with the media interruptions and interference from the government that you have. You minimise it if you can, but you live with it where you can. What's important, therefore, is that you say to your public,
Вибачте, те, що ви громадськості повинні.
standards we hold ourselves to, and then you can be responsible for that and be answerable to that. And so the relationship between, when it comes to self-regulation, there are only two parties to self-regulation. The government is irrelevant, the law is irrelevant. It is what it is, and you have to live with it. Self-regulation is a relationship between your organisation and the public. The two biggest barriers, in my mind and in my experience around the world, the two biggest barriers that prevent self-regulation from happening are simple finances. It's easy to save money by not investing in a degree of self-regulation, quality control and accountability. I understand that. But to the greatest extent you can find a way to make that very minor investment, it pays off in terms of public trust, public acceptance. The second biggest problem is not government interference, it's not regulatory issues, it's internal will and internal culture within your organisation. If the people who run your organisation, your news organisation, are not interested in having a trusted, two-way communication with the public, self-regulation will never happen. If you have that commitment, then there is a process involved, which is possible, that involves training your own staff to accept the idea that they will be answerable to the public for what they do. And their first critic and their greatest critic will be the internal critic of the organisation itself. So that's the framework as I see it. Those are the philosophical underpinnings as I see them, and they're fairly straightforward. They relate to the desire an organisation has to produce valued journalism. Valued journalism is trusted journalism. It is only trusted if the audience you are talking to feels that you're holding yourself demonstrably to a high standard, and they feel heard. They feel that they are being listened to when they complain. And if you have a strong culture of self-regulation, a strong culture of a commitment to principles and accountability, then my experience internationally is that that pays off in terms of audience loyalty, audience commitment, and audience response to the work that you do. That's the broad picture. I think I'll leave it at that for now. That's the kind of work I'm doing for OSCE at the moment, to map out some of the practical issues, the practical steps along that path. But make no mistake about it, the first step to that path is understanding as an organisation that you want to improve your relationship with your own audience and your own people who access your journalism.
Дуже дякую, пане Алан. Надзвичайно цікаво.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sunderland. It's very interesting, and I agree that it's a strategic and tactical approach to development of your media or your reputation and the way you see your future in this sector. I'm addressing now Ukrainian journalists, of course, because from the tactical point of view, it's very easy. So local election, it's either to collect money from each party to give, but from the strategic point of view, it's going to be a minus for, as for the audience. And right now, if there is no trust to you, your income will drop. But we'll speak about profit later. And I hear that Liana can join us, Liana Khorovytska, and she will show us several interesting slides. I think that after what Mr. Sunderland said, it would be very interesting to see the numbers that describe the situation in Ukraine. You're welcome, Liana.
Once again, thanks so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to take part in this public discussion. I know that you have already started discussing our research. I heard some of the questions. I will be happy to answer them. And of course, we will publish online this information on this research. Now, I would like to provide you general information why we actually carried out this research. We wanted to understand the awareness of journalists on the self-regulation of media. That is why we carried this research among a selected category of journalists. Can you please put on my presentation on the screen so I can share with you these statistics? So the general information, we tried to cover all the territory of Ukraine. The most active were Kyiv and Lviv. We carefully selected the respondents and we chose the representatives of the national and regional media and local media. We wanted to hear journalists and chief editors of the media. Our research consisted of two stages, qualitative and quantitative. First general slide consisted of two stages. Our selection of respondents was using one criteria, the side of the media, online and offline media. We received 372 invitations to the survey, and the majority, more than half of the respondents, answered our questions. It showed us that people are interested in this topic. Please, next slide. I think that for today's discussions today, you have already discussed what are the challenges on our way to self-regulation. I think you haven't started yet discussing the ways of development of self-regulation. So I hope that we will see the next slide where this information is located. Okay, then I will try to comment on these, and later we will send you the link to the full information. Okay, so next slide. I would like to ask you to show the last slide about the ways of development of self-regulation. What can you see on this slide? The most efficient way is education and raising awareness using different ways, such as spreading information among the journalists in the journalist community and other ways of spreading information. The most important thing is that this direction of development is supported by the state and by the leading universities. I think this is the brief information that we can provide you with. I hope that my colleagues will be able to discuss this issue further, and we will publish a full report on our website very soon. Thanks so much, Liana. Excellent statistics. It seems to me that we need to build a so-called bridge between the understanding that self-regulation means trust, growth in trust, and trust means improvement of the financial situation of the media and even safety and security situation of the media, because unfortunately there are a lot of attacks against journalists, and usually these are just average citizens who attack them. And let me add one more number about this self-regulation. Recently, we carried out a research and we took a look at the editorial policies on the websites of the leading Ukrainian online media. Editorial policy is the foundation of any media. This is where you stipulate your principles, your ethical principles. So this is where you can write that you stick to the requirements of the code of ethics. How do you refute information? How do you provide different opinions? And only 16% of online media have editorial policies published on their website, or something that looks like an editorial policy. So actually, we don't have a full understanding on what is responsibility, what is self-regulation, because such policies mean that the media is self-regulated. It means that they assume responsibility. And as Alan told us, self-regulation is cooperation between the media and the audience. And now I would like to give floor to Kateryna Myasnikova, head of the National Media Association of Ukraine. So we have already discussed self-regulation, about state regulation. Probably we will talk more about it. But there is also such concept as co-regulation. I would like to ask Kateryna to elaborate on co-regulation. What are the challenges? What are the problems related to this model? Thanks a lot, Oksana. Good afternoon, everyone. Co-regulation has emerged as an interim link between the state regulation and self-regulation of the media. It shall work where the state cannot regulate, cannot, for example, set standards, especially related to content, or the other, but is not ready to allow self-regulation. For example, it might happen in relation to the question what may spike, what may cause interracial or national hatred, what is racial or national hatred, or what is propaganda of communist and totalitarian regimes, because we have a decommunization law according to which such promotion is prohibited. But if we give the state the opportunity to regulate what can be considered as propaganda, this is a very fast way to censorship. But on the other hand side, these questions are too important. That is why we cannot give the media, we are not ready to give the media the opportunity to decide all of it by themselves. The state also wants to have a word in it. Well, as far as I understand, self-regulation is stipulated in the draft law on media, which is now widely discussed. Well, yes, you are right. There is a chapter in the draft law on media which stipulates the procedure of this process, creation of a co-regulation authority, and so on and so forth. Answering to Oleksiy's question, right now this project clearly stipulates what this co-regulation authority will do. Now we're discussing this draft media law, and we have very polarized opinions about journalism standards, about whether journalist standards are part of this document. We have very polarized discussions. Probably a week ago, we had a discussion which was held by the Council of Europe. There were thoughts and ideas to include media standards to this draft law as well, but there were opposing opinions not to include these standards. I'm sorry, I had some technical issues. No, it's okay, you can continue. As of now, co-regulation doesn't have doesn't include journalist standards. There are a lot of issues related to defense of protection of children and people under 18 years old. There are such things as there is an information about what can be considered a hate crime, what information can be recognized as promotion of communist or totalitarian regimes. And we also have a special case with aggressor country. Unfortunately, we have this case in our country. Okay, I have two questions. As far as I understand, co-regulation is a unique Ukrainian mechanism. For example, if we take Germany, they have a clearer distinction between the state regulator and journalist when it comes to labeling of programs on air. What was the reason behind the creation of such mechanism in Ukraine? And secondly, because we're discussing self-regulation, what, in your opinion, are the challenges on the self-regulation? Well, a co-regulation mechanism exists in different countries. For example, in France, advertising industry sets its standards, very detailed standards of advertising. But for violation of these standards, the Audiovisual Council can bring the media to responsibility. So there is such a co-regulation mechanism all over Europe, in Canada as well. So it's not an innovation which was created uniquely in Ukraine. Why we decided to use this mechanism? Why our organization supports this mechanism? Because for self-regulation, in those questions, there is not enough credit of trust from the part of the society. The state and the society are not ready to give the media the right to self-regulate these issues. And the industry is not ready to give the state the exclusive right to regulate those issues because it might lead to censorship. As for the second question, I took a look at the presentation thanks to Liana. The first two reasons why, the first two challenges, these are media that belong to oligarchs and low level of education. There are two other reasons. A lack of self-regulatory organizations. So, as for the first part of the question, it seems to me that this challenge is the most significant because we don't have a separation. When we are talking about editorial policy, we don't have a separation of what is the responsibility of the media as a business. We understand that there shall be a mechanism of communication with the media as business. It shall be so-called sanctions, a fee they need to pay if they violate the standards. Those media who make it, those organizations that make the editorial decisions are the media, or probably if the media violates the law, the audience might decrease, or the advertisers might decrease. What we lack is a public mechanism which would have such reputation consequences. We need to build it from scratch. We need to give it the opportunity to develop. It is mentioned in the research that one of the problems is low awareness. The audience is actually sometimes lazy to get to know more. That is why we need to pay more attention to promotion, to education, to raising awareness and building trust to this mechanism. So when, for example, this co-regulation authority authority makes a decision on, it is really binding.
Journalists, as those who make decisions to work in such oligarch media, they are the ones who make decisions whether or not to work in them, to fulfill the criminal order or not. So it's also a question from powerful self-regulatory or professional unions bodies who could be so important for this profession, so that the judgment of my particular work would have been a reputational story for me. But right now, as for me, the mechanism is insufficient. There is no enough influence. You know what? I'm listening to you, and I'm understanding that another component there is in this story, and that's awareness of our audience. If the audience trusts bad quality media, manipulators, those who just spread fakes, then here self-regulation will not be built, or will be difficult to build, because what reputational losses can we talk about if we just, for example, there's the Commission of the Journalistic Ethics and so on. We say that this media is a violator and its audience has another opinion. It's up to 30 or 40 million of audience who trust this media. How do we overcome this situation? I'm sure this solution or decision has to be, several levels, and there must be strategic steps to develop self-regulation, which will include education, media literacy for a wider circle of population. So self-regulatory organizations have to see as a target audience not only journalists but wider circles of people. Yes, but can I comment on this very briefly? Recently, I have read an interesting book about business consolidation, and there was an interesting example there. So the first date of bread production is put by the bakers themselves to compete with those who sell bad quality goods. And then it has become a tradition. It has become part of legislation and the liability of the producer. But the audience that has seen it, who has understood that this was respect for them, they, of course, used it as the competitive preference. Yes, I agree, because respect to audience causes trust in return, and then the audience is going to support this media, seeing that they respect this person. Yes, that's a very complex question, and unfortunately oligarchs and their impact on media market is something that's hard to get rid of. And unfortunately, in the new draft law about media, we did not see mechanisms of de-oligarchization that the new authorities declared last year. But the Institute of Mass Information, together with the Detector media, prepared the suggestions to this draft law, because we think that from the strategical point of view, globally it is important, but it needs adaptation. So this is the situation. I would like to give floor to Chair of the Board of NGO Media Detector, Natalia Ligachova. And I have the same question to her as to previous speakers. What precludes us develop self-regulation in Ukrainian market? What are the main problems we're facing now? Which are the most, topical now? So, good day. My name is Natalia Ligachova. I agree with the previous speakers that existence of oligarch model of media in Ukraine, and that the main mass of journalists, they take care not of interests of the audience, unfortunately, but they take care about are about satisfying the owners of their media outlets. And we see that on the examples of many media outlets which belong to or which are controlled by such personas like Medvedchuk or the Inter-channel, but this is mostly demonstrated by those media that change editorial guidelines and policy a lot. So right now we are monitoring when we see how the attitude is changing, how the attitude of 1+1 is changing to the revolution of dignity, who are supporting this revolution very subjectively, even sometimes. They were openly supporting the activists of the revolution of dignity. But when you now hear from the talk show presenter on 1+1 channel that revolutions don't ever are not never for good or never effective, then we understand that the owner of this media the owner's attitude to this has changed, so we can see it that he has the direct impact on what his journalists say on air. How can you fight this? Well, I think that we heard today lots of useful tips and good opinions. Self-regulatory bodies have to be more influential both for the national regulator, and they are to be the means of dispute resolution between those who submit some complaints for media and between this media and together with the Institute of Mass Information. We were even very surprised because we had a local initiative, Media Check. And we didn't think that it would be popular or will be of interest for many media. But we see an interesting example when we receive lots of complaints. And the most interesting part is those they complain about often reply to these or satisfy these complaints. Usually these complaints against regional media, and maybe because for these regional media it's important, they value the trust of their audience more than the national media do. So I would like to encourage the regulatory bodies to be more proactive as for those we write negative comments about. Because very often the Independent Media Council publishes some decision. If the National Council is willing, they edit it, but very often those we write about show no response at all. So maybe it's worth being more proactive. That's why I agree that this is the work with the mass audience, and perhaps not only with communicating on how bad this or that media outlet works, but from the proactive position concerning supporting good quality media. We mentioned a lot about such initiatives existing in many countries, like the science of good quality media. So combining self-regulatory bodies with some movements, like media movements. Media movement includes those media who agree to work according with the standards. So if we work closely with such media movements, they are more powerful because media participates in it. And if we would show to our audience which media are quality media, why are they quality media, and to use different formats, signs, videos, captions, working with the social networks, all of this will provide more strength and power to self-regulatory processes which take place in Ukraine. So work with the journalistic community, with a wider community. Yes, we lack discussions. Often the journalistic community is very divided, and I have recollected one more component that can improve the situation, and that's Ukrainian business. I know that the advertising agencies, they orient on the audience, but business should be also more socially responsible and to be trying to post ads in those media which follow the ethics, do not place fakes or hate speech, and to assist maybe some even financially for media to pay more attention to the quality. And that's now we are speaking about decisions or solutions. Think about 3 suggestions on what we can do. I know we do a lot already as organizations, but maybe there are other interesting solutions. What else can be done to develop self-regulation in Ukraine, to improve the responsibility of Ukrainian media, and to improve the financial position of them? Because I think these things are closely connected. Please. Oleksiy, yes, I would like to comment the words of Natalia Ligachova saying that the National Council reacts and pays attention to those decisions that is prepared by NMR. This is already co-regulation. It's an important thing because when the expert body prepares a decision that is used then by the state body, this is co-regulation, what I mentioned in the beginning. It's an important work, but I would like to emphasize that self-regulation is when, for example, the reader or the audience representative complained for the media to the regulatory body, and this case is solved. And I confirm the words of Natalia that usually regional media respond to it when the reader complained on the title or some mistakes, and when the decision is being prepared, the Commission of Journalist Ethics always contacts with the media that is the subject of complaint. And they would even respond to it and would change the titles or find out how was the standard violated. So they would learn from their mistakes. This is what the colleagues are mentioning. Do you remember that you said that the self-regulated organizations are to give recommendations? Yes, we are doing that. The Commission of Journalistic Ethics decided that the positive stimulation is a lot better than the negative one. And the survey shows it, that the Commission, when they say that the Commission of Journalistic Ethics is not effective, it doesn't influence anything because the decisions of it may be or may not be followed. But the state is to decide to control the compliance with the legislation, to give fines, to put into prison for violations. Never self-regulation is responsible for it. Self-regulation always works with trust, and then trust is transformed into money via increase of audience of advertising agencies. So these advices were added to the decision because in the rules of our commission, they were dwelling actually on the punishments, because we thought that it would be very valuable for the audience and for everybody to say, but not only to point out a mistake, but also to say, how was it supposed to be done? So now we are checking if this is followed, and usually we get a good reaction to it, because when we make corrections, they say that this was done wrong, and they would wonder and what would be the right way to do it. And that is popularization of standards, explaining the standards and how in this situation they were supposed to write or communicate the news to make it compliant with the standards, because in many cases it's not about conscious violation of standards. It's about tell us how to do this. And I want to speak about the oligarchic media. If we speak about the law, about the draft law, and say that it is aimed at influence the oligarch media, then why are we also speaking about the others or the rest? If it's the law about the visual media, then why are we mentioning that we also to fit in questions that are non-oligarchic?
Oligarchic media, this is a single sector in Ukraine where there are lots of money by the oligarchs. We also raise this issue as media experts. Do we need a media law? Yes, we do. But there are some things which shall not be accepted in the first reading. We need to improve it to make it better. Katya Myasnikova, can you please tell us how you see development of self-regulation of the media? Do you actually see development of the self-regulation in Ukraine? Yes, I do see it. I would like to support my colleagues and to say that I am for positive methods of motivation. As you know, we've been organizing a competition which is called the Dignity of the Profession. We added to our nominations requirements of the code of the journalist ethics. All people who apply, who submit their works to our contest, they need to check whether they correspond to the requirements. In order to build trust, we need to overcome the first stage. We need our authorities responsible for self-regulation to have a high level of trust and a high level of awareness on behalf of the journalists and on behalf of the society. They don't only have to show the mistakes or violations. Probably they can create a ranking of the most ethical media. Probably we can create something like a sign of quality, which the media that correspond to the highest standards can publish on their websites. Because for businesses, it's actually very important to show that they have high quality or enough quality. I think these positive methods of motivation can be used in Ukraine. They will create additional reasons for the media to talk about that, to talk about sticking to the ethical standards. Probably media can say why they stick to these standards, why it is good for them. And it also might create a so-called professional envy, and other media will follow suit. They will follow those who are on the good side, on the white side. But of course, we have quite a lot of those media that consciously don't stick to the standards, don't even respect the legislation, the national legislation. And until we create a relevant mechanism to fight those violations, until we can differentiate this media, we can move forward. I am against self-regulation bodies to be mentioned in the legislation. It shall be decided on the level of the market itself, on the level of the media industry. The state doesn't have to interfere in it. But it would be good if the National Council would react to these authorities of self-regulation. If there was a mention of self-regulation in the legislation of Ukraine, I think it would increase trust in them. Well, for many years in a row, we've discussed the so-called press cards, which will help, or we'll discuss the necessity to control their activities. When I'm talking about the state, when the state proves or implements developments of a regulatory authority, sometimes it is already self-regulation. Self-regulation can happen when, for example, I, as representative of the profession, get some kind of a complaint or a benefit, and I am proud, or I think it is a problem for my reputation. Only then I can understand that this self-regulation body is really working. It has an impact. Thanks so much, Katya. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. That is why I would like to give word to Natalia Ligachova, and I would like her to tell us about the key problems. Continuing what Katya said, shall we talk about self-regulation in the society? Reacting to by state authorities, by state bodies on the decisions of self-regulation bodies can be called co-regulation, but the key decision was the decision of this self-regulation body. Well, of course, first it must mean something to the media, but in Ukraine, why it's not legally binding by the state. The media that belong to oligarchs, they don't react to decisions by the self-regulation bodies. This is the truth. That is why I think we shall at least mention in the legislation in this draft law on media that the state regulation body can appeal to decisions of the self-regulation bodies in order to tackle an issue. I would offer it for discussion. Secondly, I'm answering the question, which are the three things that need to be done? Secondly, shifting the focus to the positive side, to the search for positive examples and PR in a good meaning of the word. And third, united different initiatives which are on the right side. Media check, media ruch, independent media council. We need to unite in our actions, and we need to find a broader audience. If we unite our efforts, our forces, if we unite around an initiative aimed at a broad audience, if we have enough financial resources, and we know the responsibilities of all the people involved, if we can explain what media are of high quality and which are not, I think it would be a powerful impetus to development of self-regulation in Ukraine. Thank you so much. I see that Oleksiy wants to comment on that. Natalia, thanks so much for your suggestions to unite our forces. This is actually what we all do. We have a coalition of 5 election monitoring organizations. It has worked in Ukraine in the previous elections, so we have this experience. But I'm very grateful for your proposition, for your suggestion to unite our forces, because it will be all across the industry. It would be excellent if every self-regulation organization declares its niche, declares its part of the work. But not all of these organizations are self-regulating, right? Well, I mean those organizations that work with ethics and standards. Well, there are expert organizations, there are self-regulation organizations. Well, maybe citizens from all over Ukraine will watch our program. We have a question to our experts. How can we influence propaganda, including, in particular, propaganda of DNR or Donetsk, so-called Donetsk People's Republic? First of all, this is the question to the legislators, including it must include criminal liability, and it does require regulation. As my colleagues have said before, there are cases when the state shall interfere and shall regulate the situation. But if you take a look at the propaganda, there are no direct calls to start a war or to do something like that, but there might be fakes, manipulations with emotions, or probably they just don't tell all the information. And this is the discussion that Kateryna tells us about. There are some things that shall be discussed. That is why I insist on separating the responsibilities. What you are talking about, these are expert opinion plus responsibility or liability. This is co-regulation. This is where the industry must be involved when it comes to standards, for example, if journalists fail to fulfill their commitments. This is what our experts said. Well, this is a long story which requires a lot of time. If we would like to make it overnight, then we need regulation. Kateryna or Natalia, maybe you can comment on that. And I would like to read our next question. When the oblast administrations will support local media? Well, we don't have the answer to this question, but we can only recommend you some ways of development, probably to increase trust in the media. Right now, we see very interesting methods of co-financing of the local media globally, all around the world. This is a local media that develop very fast because citizens are interested in reading what is happening in those places where they live. Local media provide the society with the answers to all these questions. That is why they can engage the audience and ask them for financial support. Municipal newspapers in the regions, they are still dependent on the state. I mean, well, this question is not actually very related to our conversation. Uh, there is a lot of prefabricated news in the media. Well, it's a problem that we do have. Uh, Reacting to this is very important. You, as representatives of the audience, can react to such problems. You can write a letter to the audience, to the media, and write about it in your social networks. I would like to join you on this. You not only can, but we would like to ask you to do that, to react each time you see such prefabricated news or fake news, because only public pressure will allow us to react and to improve the quality of the media that work for us. But it is a long way to go. We cannot change it overnight. It will happen when we will do it together, but we will need many more years to reach that goal. I do understand, I do agree that we lack informing the citizens about what is a media, how are they self-regulated. We have questions about the editorial policy, about the research. So please take a look at the report which was recently published at our website. We analyzed Ukrainian media, and it turned out that only 16% of the media have editorial policies published online. TV channel, it turns out, are more transparent than online media. A question to our experts. I would like to ask Kateryna and Natalia to tell us, how do you assess, evaluate the level of media criticism in our country? Can you please repeat the question? How do you evaluate the level of media criticism in our country? And do we have enough organizations like this in Ukraine? I think that the media criticism is developing within the framework of one media, which is actually Detector media, our media.
And I'm so sorry that the media critics, the way this media was called, that existed in Lviv, barely works these days. What we lack? Well, Detector media can provide not all, but more or less critic of TV content, but we do not have media criticism of online content. Well, that online is by Institute of Mass Information, responsibility. Yes, you have it, but we have ratings. You do it very well, but there is more of the criticism that shows what's good or bad. I mean, some articles, analytical information. I'm glad that Oleksiy joined you now, and he does it. But it can be done better. But all is lacking is financing, yes, to spread this aspect. And by the way, I join the words of Oksana that you have to also involve business, also to placing or not placing ads in certain media outlets. And we heard the positive examples when certain advertisement agencies, they stopped placing their ads in media who were violating not just standards, but business can be encouraged to support self-regulatory criticism. Yes, I support you. So, dear business, if you can hear us, using this chance, please support Ukrainian media organizations. Dear colleagues, I'm really grateful to all of you for a very interesting discussion, since the problem of self-regulation in Ukraine is very acute. Lots of fakes, lots of manipulation, and many questions to state regulation, to the quality of it. We are to develop co-regulation as a mechanism, and we need to transform self-regulation from the problem to a solution. I'll be very glad if the audience that has listened to us today, they will Google more information on the topic of self-regulation and those organizations that represent it. Thank you to all of my colleagues who are here in the studio and who joined us on Zoom. And I would like to say words of gratitude to Mr. Alan Sunderland for such a clear and interesting information by answering the question so distinctly. And I would like to thank to all organizers and those who have conducted the survey.